We are in this little kind of 2-week series. Last week we heard from Pastor Brian, and he talked to us about how joyful generosity is played out as we learn Jesus. And how as we learn Jesus in joyful generosity, that leads us to missions, right? That leads us to making disciples. That leads us to spreading Christ-like joy to our neighborhood, our region, and our world. And we're going to continue that this morning. But before we do, would you pray with me? God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that in your word, you teach us how to be joyfully generous. That in your word, as we learn more about you, you teach us how to live in genuine community. God, that your word challenges us to change who we are more and more every day, to be more and more like you in our generosity and our genuine community. And God, that as we learn more and more about you, we cannot help but let the world around us know about who you are. We pray this morning that you would challenge us. We pray this morning that you would teach us from your word, that you would speak through me and speak to our very hearts in your name. Amen. All right, I'm going to age myself a little bit here, but when I was a young man, there was this band that I absolutely loved. They were called DC Talk. Raise your hand if you've heard of DC Talk. Okay, people are laughing. Okay, at least I'm not alone. In one of their songs, they had this quote by a guy named Brennan Manning. And the quote was this: "The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and then walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable." And I remember hearing the music, and we'd get to this quote, and I'd be like, oh, who would do that? How could people deny Christ by the way that they live if they're going to claim to follow Jesus? And we're going to talk a little bit about what that might look like this morning, and we are going to start in Matthew chapter 22. Because in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is being challenged. The Sadducees have just kind of challenged him with some stuff, and so then this lawyer steps up, and he's like, okay, so far nobody's won the challenges, so I'm going to step up, and I'm going to throw something at him. And that's where we pick up in Matthew chapter 22, verse 34. It says this: "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him." So like, we got to see if we can stump him. "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus says to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart." I love that the slide stops right here. The verse isn't over. Jesus, in classic Jesus fashion, he over-answers the question. They asked him for one answer, he's going to give them two. "And with all your soul and with all your mind, this is the great and first commandment." This is great. The 38 and 38, look at that. This is the great, and it's so great, in fact, that we're going to see it twice. All right. "And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So he shows up, he asks him a question. What's the greatest commandment? What's the most important commandment? And Jesus is like, you know what, I'll tell you what, I'll give you two. But the first one, the most important commandment, the most important thing that you could possibly know, the most important thing you could possibly understand is that you are to love the Lord your God. That's it. Number one, among all the things, is love God. Love God with everything you have. Love God with everything you are. Love God with everything that's inside of you. And as we learn more and more about Jesus, I hope it is clear that the first thing we must understand is that all glory, all honor, every ounce of love we are capable of belongs to him. Right? That everything I have inside me should be directed at him. And so Jesus says, hey, the very first thing that you must know is that you must love God. And not only does he say this, but he models it for us as we read through the scripture, as we learn Jesus, right? As we understand him more and more, he shows us over and over and over again how much he loved the Father. Throughout all of his ministry, what do we see? We see Jesus constantly going away to spend time with the Father. We see him constantly in prayer talking to the Father. We see him constantly obeying the will of the Father as he loves him by obedience. We see him over and over and over again giving everything he has to love the Father and to do his will. Church, this morning, can I say this to you? Any attempt that we are going to make to mobilize disciple makers to bring Christ-like joy, it starts there. Love God. We cannot possibly help the world see God if we don't love him. We cannot possibly help the world understand who God is and what he's done in our lives unless we love him with all of ourselves. Because it is out of that desire, it is out of that love, it is out of that knowing and understanding the grace of God in our lives that we are going to be able to show the world the grace of God in their lives. And so it must begin with love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with everything you have. But Jesus wasn't done, right? Because he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And then he says, but there's a second commandment. And it's so close, in fact, to the first commandment that when I tell you what the first commandment is, I have to honorably mention the second commandment, right? Like they're so tied together that I can't just throw one at you. I've got to throw two at you. And so he says, the greatest commandment is love God with all you have. But the second, very close to it in form and in function, is love your neighbor as yourself. Right up next to love God is love people. Jesus says you should love God with everything you have, but you should also love the people around you. You should also love your neighbor as yourself. And if you want to know who your neighbor is, Jesus has got a whole parable about it. You can go check it out. But we understand and we know that when Jesus says we're to love our neighbor, he's telling us we're to love every single person that we come in contact with. He's telling us that everyone in this world is our neighbor. He's telling us that, man, as much as we love ourselves, he's calling us to love other people. As much as I love me, he says love others. And the more we learn about Jesus, I love this, the more we see this truth play out. As we read through the Gospels, as we watch how Jesus lives his life, we see him loving people in every moment of his life. Like when there was a woman who had a bleeding disorder, and she reached out and she touched him, and by touching him, making him unclean and causing all sorts of issues, he loved her and he looked at her and he had compassion on her and he heals her. When the children are running around and they're close by and the disciples are like, oh, get those kids out of here. I don't need them here. Jesus stops them and he brings them close and he hugs them and he prays over them and he shows compassion and he loves them. When he's traveling by and a blind man is hollering at him from across the road, he stops and he has compassion on him and he heals him and he loves him. When he encounters a paralytic, he stops and he has compassion and he heals him and he loves him. When there's a woman who's caught in adultery, in the very act, in the midst of it, everyone's saying, hey, we should probably stone her. That's what the law says. And in that moment, Jesus sees her, he has compassion on her, and he loves her. When I was caught in my sin, broken and beaten, lost and without hope, Jesus had compassion on me. And he went to the cross to pay the penalty that I owed. He died there bearing my sin on his shoulders and forgiving me if I would simply believe. He loved me when you were caught in your sin and your brokenness, when you may be caught now in your sin and your brokenness. Believe in the Father. He has compassion and he shows you love every moment of every day. And amazingly, after 3 years of constantly loving people, Jesus says this to his disciples. He says, a new commandment I give you, that you are to love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. Now, isn't this incredible? They've watched Jesus love people for 3 years. Not only that, but they've experienced the love of Jesus in their own life for 3 years. For 3 straight years, he has been loving them. For 3 straight years, he has been fixing what's broken in them. For 3 straight years, they've been seeing his compassion and his love for other people. And over and over and over again, Jesus has shown them what it looks like to love him. As they've learned more and more about Jesus, he has shown them one thing for certain, how to love the people around him. And then this is literally hours before he's going to be arrested, a day before he's going to go to the cross and give his life for his disciples. And in that moment, he says this statement, as I have loved you, love one another. You have learned from me how you ought to live. You have learned from me. You have seen it. You've experienced it firsthand. Now go and love like I do. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm the disciples in that moment, I'm going, oh, tall order. Right? I'm going, whew, the way you love people is how I'm supposed to love people? Like, that's hard because Jesus loved perfectly, remember? Because they experienced the love of Christ again and again, and they saw what it looked like again and again. And in that moment, Jesus says, what I've shown you, how I've loved people, go and love each other. And if this statement alone is not out of this world crazy, the next one is incredible. He says, by this, all people will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another. He says, love people like I've loved you. Love each other like I've loved you. And if you do that, if you can love each other the same way in which I have loved you, that is what is going to mobilize disciple makers to bring Christ-like joy in our neighborhood, our region, and our world. If you can love people like I have loved you, that is what is going to show the world who Jesus is, who I am. Notice he does not say, live perfectly and all the world will know. Notice he does not say, go out on the mission field every day and all the world will know. He does not say, volunteer at Arcade Kids Camp and all the world will know. He does not say, tithe to the church, half of your belongings, and all the world will know. He does not even say, volunteer in high school ministry, the greatest calling anyone could possibly have, and all the world will know. That's not what he says. He says, if you love each other, then all the world will know that you are my disciples. If you have love for one another, that is what is going to do it. That is what is going to show the world who I am. That is what is going to spread Christ-like joy to our neighborhood, our region, and our world. Love for one another. John goes so far as to say in 1 John chapter 2, beloved, I am writing you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you have had from the beginning, right? He's referring back to the commandment that Jesus was giving right here in this passage. It's not new. You've heard it before. The old commandment, the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I am writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away, and the true light is already shining. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light. John goes so far as to say, hey, if you hate your brother, if you don't have love for your brother, then you are still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. You see, Jesus says, by this all people will know you're my disciples if you have love for one another. And John goes so far as to say, if you don't have love for one another, then you don't have love for Jesus. Right? He goes so far as to say, if you don't love each other, then you must not love Christ, because it is a natural outflow of love for Christ. It is a natural showing that we are in the light, that we are walking in the light if we have love for one another. Just as Jesus said that we are to love each other and then the world will know, John says if we hate our brother, we are walking in darkness and we are blind just like the rest of the world. Church, this means that if we're sitting here right now and we have people in our minds, people maybe in this very room, they're like, oh, I hate that guy. He's so annoying. I hope he doesn't come and try and talk to me after church today. And if he does, I'm going to pretend I didn't see him and I'm going to run the other direction. Man, John is challenging us this morning. He's saying, man, maybe you're blind to the love of Christ because of the way you feel towards other people. Because when this works, when God's people love each other, we see what happens. We see how this love plays out. In the early church, people were sharing their possessions. They were giving of their own resources to help those in need. They were risking their lives to bring the gospel anywhere and everywhere. They were going against societal norms. They were teaching the gospel to the unloved, to the marginalized. They were sharing the gospel with their racial enemies. They were welcoming into the church anyone who would listen. We see there in the early chapters of Acts the direct result of all they had learned from Jesus. And you know what it looks like? It looks like genuine community. A people who love others to such a degree that all are welcome. A people who love others so much that they are willing to go beyond the normal boundaries and find and love people just like Jesus did. And as we watch that play out in the early church, as we watch what genuine community looked like in the early church, we see as their social and religious norms are challenged, they get together and they figure out how to love people better, right? Like in the early church, the Gentile widows were being treated unfairly. They were being treated poorly because why? Because they were the racial enemies of the Jews. Because it was hard to love people that were so different from them. Hard to love people that for so long they were told to hate, right? And so they weren't being treated fairly. And what happened? In the early church, they got together and said, we got to fix this because we are to be a genuine community here and we are to love each other. In the early church, when the Gentiles were being challenged on circumcision, they were being challenged on the law, and they got together and said, man, what are we going to do? Because we got to figure out how to love each other, even if our religion earlier was different from pursuing Jesus now. And so they got together and they figured out, how do we love Christ and what does it look like to love Christ? In the midst of some of the craziest ingrained church teachings for all of eternity, they were able to get together and figure out how to love people outside of that. And genuine community looked like we love each other no matter what. And here's the deal. When God's... Oh yeah, I wrote that down, just in case you guys are wondering. That was in your bulletin. Now you have it. Anyway, here's where I was going. When God's people love one another in genuine community, the world will know that we are his disciples. When we as a church, we come to a place where we love each other, it's going to show everyone outside the church that we are his disciples. It's going to show everyone inside the church that we are his disciples. Man, I can do all of the outreach in the world. I can give all the money I have to help the needy. I can do everything imaginable to love the community around the church. I could go into the apartment complexes and I can bring them all sorts of cool things, and I could do everything I can think of to help the people around me. And if one day they finally walked into this building because of everything I did to draw them to this building, if they finally walked in this building and they saw me hating someone who was right here in the room, I'll tell you, they'd walk out. Because the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and then walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. And that is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. If I don't figure out how to be in genuine community here, I have very little hope of bringing anyone to the gospel. I have very little hope of helping anyone see Christ. Jesus modeled this for us in the way he loved the children, the outcasts, the broken, the hurting, the unlikely, the hot-headed, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, and everyone in between. There's this kind of little contextually challenging thing that's happening in all the passages I showed you this morning. Right? Because in the passage, Jesus says that they're going to know your disciples by the way you love one another. And who he's talking to is the disciples. He's talking to the Christians, right? And he's saying, if Christians love each other, then the world's going to know that you're Christians. And John also says, if you have love for your brothers, and if you don't hate your brothers. So he also is talking about Christians. And that's a little bit contextually challenging because originally, when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he says, love the Lord, and then he says, love your neighbor. And when he says, love your neighbor, he's not exactly talking about Christians. He's talking about everyone. So here's the contextual challenge, right? Jesus says here, the second most important commandment is to love everyone. And then later he says, people are going to know you're my disciples if you have love for one another. And John says, if you love your brother, you're going to know my disciples. So this is in the church and this is outside the church. But what's interesting and what I love is that even though that's a bit contextually challenging, when we watch how Jesus acts, when we watch what Jesus does in his day-to-day, when we watch how Jesus lives his life, we see Jesus loving all people the same. We see Jesus, he didn't say, man, I reserve special kind of love for those inside the church, right? I reserve special kind of love for those that are shoulder to shoulder with me all the time. We see Jesus love people, period. No matter where they're at, no matter what's going on in their life, no matter what they're walking through, no matter what difficulty they might be walking into, Jesus loves people. He modeled the second greatest commandment, and he called us to model it as well. He told us if we love people like he did, they will follow him like we did, right? And it starts right here. Now you may have noticed, I have not told a single story to illustrate. Oh, hey, check. That was weird. Still working? Yeah. I've not told a single funny story to illustrate this truth this morning, and I know that's unlike me. I know that normally I'm all about funny stories. I'm all about telling you about my cute kids and the silly things they do, and I could tell you all sorts of stories about how they love or don't love one another. I promise. But for this morning, I didn't think this truth needs a story to grab our attention. I didn't think it was necessary to tell something, to give you an analogy of what love in the church should look like, right? Because I think we know what love in the church should look like. I think we know what genuine community should look like. But just to give you a little picture of what it might look like, I want to show you a video. And our amazing tech people, when I texted them this morning at about 8:15 and said, hey, I want to show this video today, is it possible? They made it happen. And so we're going to watch this video. But before we watch that, I just want to give a tiny bit of context. We're at camp this week, high school, we went to camp. Yeah, woohoo, high school camp. Whoa, look at them up there. They're loud. Thanks for being loud. We spent the whole week in a super tight-knit group, off in our own little camp area. There were a bunch of other churches there, but they were also doing their own thing throughout the camp. And we were by ourselves. But on the last night, we had what's called group campfire. We invited all the churches to come together for one final campfire. We didn't know these people. We'd maybe played gaga ball with them. This thing doesn't like me this morning. If anything, there was a bit of a rivalry, because there was a gaga ball rivalry. There was a 9-square rivalry. You know, we were like making sure our church won everything, which I'm pretty sure we did. We got all these churches together that didn't know each other. Most likely, they didn't have the same theology. Most likely, we believed differently on some key points and things like that. Who knows? We got all of them together, and this is what happened. They're making me switch mics here. I broke this one. Check, check. Ooh. All right. So anyway, we got them all together, and there was this moment where some of the students in our church decided to link arms. Arm around the shoulder of the person next to them, arm around the shoulder. And I'm like 3 rows back, and I'm watching this happen. Arm around the shoulder, arm around the shoulder, arm around the shoulder. The person who has a person from a different church next to him kind of like gets an arm around the shoulder, looks over, puts an arm around their shoulder, right? And then it goes, then it goes, then it goes. And the row behind them, they all do it. And then the row behind them, they all do it. And next thing you know, all these churches together who don't know each other, who haven't met, who haven't talked, who haven't hung out, are arm in arm, worshiping the Father, loving God as they love each other. And I just get to watch, right? And I get to be like, whoa, this is what happens when we love each other. And I tell you, anyone there, anyone who came to camp from any of the churches who hadn't yet chosen to be a part of the family of God, anyone who hadn't yet chosen to follow Jesus, somehow they found their way to camp. And somehow at the end of the week, they saw a people group loving each other despite differences, despite gaga ball losses, despite anything else that might be going on in their hearts and in their lives. They saw a community of people loving each other. And how much greater of a chance do they have in becoming a disciple maker? Imagine what happens when a church's community is so genuine, a Muslim can walk into it and feel loved and accepted. That instead of judgment or fear, they are met with smiles and constant blundering attempts to step into their culture and love them. Imagine if that same community were to continue to love them even if they did not immediately accept Christ and change their entire lifestyle. Imagine if that same community went out to find them, to encourage them, to live alongside them, to eat with them, and just keep loving them like Jesus would if they felt just as at home here as they did anywhere else in the world. Imagine what happened when a church's community is so genuine that a gay person can walk into it and feel loved and accepted. That instead of judgment and fear, they are met with smiles and constant blundering attempts to step into their culture and to love them. Imagine if that same community were to continue to love them without constantly demanding that they change their thinking and conform to a certain standard. Imagine if that same community went out to find them, to encourage them, to love them, to live alongside them, to eat with them, and just kept loving them like Jesus would, if they felt just as at home here as they did anywhere else in the world. Imagine what happened when a church's community is so genuine, a homeless person can walk into it and feel loved and accepted. That instead of judgment and fear, they are met with smiles and constant blundering attempts to step into their culture and to love them. Imagine if that same community were to continue to love them without constantly expecting them to get their act together and get a job. Imagine if that same community went out to find them, to encourage them, to live alongside them, to eat with them, and just kept loving them like Jesus would, and they felt more at home here than anywhere else. Imagine what happens when a church's community is so genuine that a trans person can walk into it and feel loved and accepted. And instead of judgment and fear, they're met with smiles and constant blundering attempts to step into their culture and to love them. Imagine if that same community were to continue to love them without constantly demanding that they change their gender or conform to its standard. Imagine if that same community went out to find them, to encourage them, to live alongside them, to eat with them, and just kept loving them like Jesus would. If they felt just as home here as they could anywhere else. Just imagine if the church would no longer simply claim to love Jesus, but actually love others like he did. Thus, proving and not denying by their lifestyle who he is. Imagine if what the world found so undeniably unbelievable was that the people of God loved people no matter what. And when they figured that out, they said it must be because God loves people. It must be because the Father himself loves me no matter what. And that's why his people love me no matter what. And so I want to know him. I want to believe in him because only there am I going to find true love. Only in this community is there any hope of finding what love really is. If you're here this morning, you came hoping maybe here someone would love you. If you're listening online right now wondering if maybe this is a place where you can find genuine community with people who will love you, can I just say, man, we want to love you like Jesus, who gave his life that you may have life and have it abundantly. He loves you perfectly, and we're not perfect. We're not going to love you as perfectly as he did. We're going to blunder, and we're going to mess up, but we're going to try. We're going to try and love you with everything we have, just like Jesus loved us with everything he has. And we would love if you would give us a chance. No matter who you are or what's going on in your life, we will keep trying to love you like Jesus does. If you're here this morning and you were following me, yep, we need to love each other. Yep, we should love people. Yep, I love the church. Yep, people are great. Right up until I started naming the marginalized. Right up until I started naming some of the hurting people in the world, and your immediate thought was, ooh, but not those people. Can I challenge you this morning to give that to Christ? Can I, without hurting your feelings too much, say maybe you're blind right now and you need to come to Jesus? You need to figure out what genuine community looks like and what loving others looks like, because Jesus challenged us to do so. Because John said if we don't love others, then we don't love Jesus. And so there's something going on in your heart if your immediate thought was, I don't know if I can love those people. Can I challenge you this morning? Come down and talk to an elder about that. Come down and talk to me and say, man, it's really hard for me to love fill in the blank. And we can pray with you and encourage you along those lines and help you love like Christ, all people in all places. If you're here this morning and you haven't yet joined a gather group, can I encourage you to do that? When you join a gather group, you step into a smaller, genuine community that is a part of the greater, genuine community of Arcade Church. When you join a gather group, it allows you to step into that community and to be real and to have realness alongside you. It helps you to have people to love that are also going to love you like Christ loves you. It makes it to where you can't sneak into the church and out of the church without ever stepping into the community of the church. So would you join one? I was just talking to Pastor Cole this morning. He told me if you were to pull out your phone, you were to go to that app and you were to click connect and gather groups, right there is a list of all the gather groups. Right there is a way for you to connect with those gather groups and plug into one. So go do that. Be a part of the genuine community of Arcade Church in its smaller and in its larger. And if you're in a gather group already, then the challenge is this: be genuine in your genuine community. Share what's really going on in your life. Share what you're really walking through. Man, if your marriage is in the pits, tell your gather group. Marriage is hard right now. Here's why. If you're fighting with your kids, tell your gather group. I'm having trouble with parenting right now. Here's why. If you're struggling with sin, tell your gather group, man, this part of my life has been kicking my butt lately. How can I get help in this? If you're genuine in your community, then your community can genuinely love you. And so if you've been afraid to tell them what's going on because you're afraid they'll judge you, because you're afraid they won't love you, well, hopefully they were listening this morning and they're going to love you like Jesus did, or at least try as hard as they possibly can. Be genuine in your community. If you're in a gather group already, invite someone to that group that needs to be in genuine community no matter where they are in life, no matter what they're walking through, no matter what challenges, no matter what difficulties. Invite them to come join your gather group. Invite them to come hang out in the smaller group before they come into the big church, so that they can see that they don't have to be afraid, because here we're going to love them. Genuine community was never meant to be a super tight, closed club, but a super bright light in the midst of a dark world. So let's shine that light by loving people just as Jesus loved us. God, we thank you for loving us. We don't deserve it. We never have. God, if there's anything in us that has said other people need to deserve the love of Jesus before I'm going to give it to them, would you break that down today and remind us that when I deserved nothing, you loved me. God, would you help me to love all people in all places? Lord, would you help me by my love for others in this room, by my love for others outside of this room, to be a light to this world that shines so bright, because this world is terrible at loving. But may we, the church, be wonderful at it. In you and through you. In your name. Amen. May the God of endurance and encouragement grant you to live in harmony with one another, that together with one voice you may glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. And we say together, for the glory of God. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for watching. Find out more about the Arcade Church community at arcadechurch.com.